Hello and welcome to an episode of Casual Friday. I'm here with the Duck. As always, the show is brought to you by Woo. Links available in the description below. So Don, do you regret flying over to the US without any voter ID, voting for Donald Trump, and then this is the price action that you get? Do you miss Kamala Harris and Gary Gensler?
I mean, biggest mistakes I've ever made. Can I take my vote back?
This is why we need voter ID laws. It's just not in the way we thought it
Dude,
would pan out.
yeah, I can't believe that I flew all the. You know how much I paid for that flight ticket
I
to
think,
vote
didn't
for
George
Donald
Soros
Trump?
buy your ticket and then you just voted for Trump instead? I thought that was the story.
I mean, I don't remember,
You were
but
on one of those buses of people being shuttled around, from polling station to polling station.
yeah, no, I just vote for Donald Trump every time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you sure got them good.
yeah, and he got us good.
Yeah,
Fucking Christ.
I know it's been quite something. We'll talk about the S&P. We'll talk about BTC. Um, I'm actually on the monthly time frame right now, and we
On
love
Bitcoin.
this time frame. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
In general, this is a great time frame, as we keep harping on about. Usually, it's best for when things look really bad. You can cope with a monthly level. The big discounted nuke test
Yeah.
into monthly level. You kind of buy it and then you close your eyes because sometimes it can take a while to resolve. And if you look at it on timeframes that are too low, you'll get chopped up, so on and so forth. We're not quite there on the monthly. Like, if you weren't in crypto and someone showed you this chart and they're like, here's the time frame, and let's say you didn't even know it was the monthly time frame, you're like, where is support on this thing? I think you'd probably just look at the earliest towards the prior range breakout, right? Which is like 71, 74, whatever you want to call it, the top of the consolidation. You could even cluster out the whole thing from highest close to lowest close of like 60 to 70 and be like, yeah, I mean, that's where the structure is by definition. Um, the question I have about the monthly is, you know how we had a few candles before this, obviously, and we had the green one at the top, a little cluster before that, and if you really wanted to cope on the TA side, you could make an argument that this is like a retest of the December cluster, December
Yeah.
January cluster from the underside. Now, historically, we haven't been very big fans of like micro monthly levels, if that makes sense. This time frame generally works best when it's the big boys. But do you think there's anything else on this time frame other than 60 to 70k? Hey, it's all gone to shit, but this is the best thing we've got. Like, are you interested in anything at the 70s, at the 80s? Is that green candle a valid cluster? Like, can we squeeze more juice from the monthly, or is that not available in your view?
I mean, I talked about that kind of bearish retest like 2 weeks ago on my Wednesday
Okay.
stream. I was like, when we were trading, like, yeah, I think it was 2 weeks ago when we were trading up there, I was like, you can make an argument that like this is a bearish retest. And then I coupled it with the daily bearish retest that we got back then. And I was like,
Okay.
this is a decent bearish setup. And that played out quite nicely. But other than that, and I think that's just a short time frame kind of signal that you get, right? Sometimes you have like a high time frame level, but it's like somewhat meh. So you just use it for like one short term trade. Full transparency, I didn't do anything with it, but that's kind of how I look at these. Like when you get at a level like that, just use it for one trade, um, in and out quite quickly, and that's it. In terms of support, I agree with you. There's really nothing. It starts like you can use the monthly um, by just using it as a reclaim kind of level, right? The same level, 94k. Just be like, okay, we'll reclaim that cluster. We're off to the races. But yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily think there's much there. If it giga dumps anything between 60, 70k, I think would be just like, I think at that point we're way oversold.
You
And then
have
you're
to
going
you
to
have
get,
to trade that, right? Like it's
yes,
your duty bound. I feel like if you get like a 40% pullback into a monthly level, like if you're in crypto, you have to be in the order book. It feels like
yeah.
sort of a non-negotiable.
It's the only way I would trade this with leverage. Like
Okay.
I'm not really interested buying leverage here. No matter how good it looks, I don't really care. Like if anything, I would want to buy with leverage when it's super discounted, or when I'm actually reasonably certain that we've kind of defeated the bears and reclaimed bullish market structure, and that would be on lower time frames, like a reclaim of 90k. Unless that happens, like either giga nuke and then I'm interested, or just a reclaim on the lower time frames. But like this, not really that interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's pretty sensible. And again, it's one of those cases where the monthly is great, but you will still see those levels on lower time frames. Just kind of monthly as a effect. It's a sort of quality multiplier, right? When it comes
Yeah.
to the setup. The weekly, I think, is one of the interesting ones. There's been a lot of chatter about like the last weekly close, and the prevailing theme being like the weekly chart is kind of broken, I think is the language
Hmm.
used. And I think that's not a terrible take, right? Like
Yeah,
sometimes you
I
just
agree.
have like a very clear consolidation or a really clear level and it's lost. And like that's it. That kind of sets the prevailing bias. And anything else that happens in between is kind of just less important, less attractive. And it kind of works both ways. So, for example, if we were looking at the 60K range as we did, or the 70K pre-Trump range, and then the market broke out, like that was also a chart that's broken, just in a very good way, right? It's like, okay, well, this is a pretty unambiguous signal of a break to the upside. Of course, you can start all the counterfactual stuff like, okay, but if this breakout fails, then it turns into a deviation, yada, 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 like 3 layers of abstraction. But like fundamentally, when looking at the impulse of the move, I think the weekly time frame is generally pretty good for those kind of trend setting breakouts and breakdowns. At least that's one of my preferred ways to use it. I mean, even on the way up, the post ETF breakout, I think we spoke about this as well at length at the time, at like 47K, that weekly close. I mean, that was a pretty big deal. The 30 to 35K reclaim, breaking out of that was also a pretty big deal. It's even like 30K pre 35K, just from that awful consolidation in July of 23, that, it's the same thing. It's like, look, yeah, you're not going to get perfect sniper entries with the weekly close, but for the most part, when you get those impulse bars in levels where at levels where there's structure or there's a range or something like that, it tends to be a pretty important point in the market. So, like, again, viewing this like as an outsider, looking at this weekly chart, it seems to me like, okay, we had a consolidation, it broke to the downside. If you want to be a buyer outside of like low time frame trading, you generally either want to wait for a deeper discount or like clear evidence of strength, which is what you said earlier.
Yeah.
And I think the clear discount would be anything pushing into the prior range, like lows, even as early as low 70s, realistically, right? Like
Yeah.
the wick portion, like that's pretty bloody close. And then in terms of like percentage drawdown, we've already hit like, I think, dude, it was 30% on the dot. How funny is that on the Coinbase feed?
Oh,
30% pullback from high to low. And then if you get into the 70s, that's your kind of pie in the sky 30 to 40-ish% pullback. So I think at that point, you're very well grounded, at least on technical terms, to be like, okay, well, we broke down. I didn't lose all my money, and now we're entering like deep discount type of territory. And the cool thing about deep discount type of territory is that even if it's not super trend reversing, V reversal to new all time highs, like if it even gets you from support to resistance, there's like a massive trade there in most cases that's worth taking. And then on the strength side, it's like, well, look, we ranged for like 2 months and broke down. Get back above it, and the old classic trading trope of failed breakdown, push it to the upside. And I think at that point you could be well served in at least having a preliminary target of new all-time highs, right? So like
yeah.
these two options are attractive in their own ways. The deeper discount one is that even if you're wrong and the trend is cooked, the bounce that it generates, even if it's not trend reversing, is like pretty fucking sizable and is very much worth trading. And the upside of the reclaim trade is that, yeah, your entry is quote unquote worse or later, but then at least you can reasonably target like new all time highs without being totally insane, and whatever acceleration hopefully happens afterwards. Do you agree with that framing? Do you think there's anything that's missing in that analysis?
No, I 100% agree. Like that's basically how I look at it too.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward, really. Like in these circumstances, it's really straightforward because it's such a clean range breakdown, right? Like
Sure.
when it's ambiguous, it's a little bit more tough to kind of make the call. But right now, it's pretty clean, and I mean we do have macro factors kind of supporting at this range breakdown. Technically speaking, right? Like if you're just looking at the technicals and looking at macro and everything else, it kind of makes sense to assume that this is a broken range until proven otherwise. And like you said, kind of assuming that it's fake before it's proven to be fake is usually silly. Just scroll out, like zoom out a little bit, scroll to the left, and you'll see that rarely kind of is a winning strategy, at least on the weekly time frame.
Yeah, I think that's sensible. Obviously, the tricky part at the moment is that we've mapped out those extremes, if you will, 94 plus or ballpark 60, 70. But the market's not there at the moment, right? And as you know, if you don't take a trade every single day, you're not a real trader. So that raises the natural objection of what the fuck do you do now? If you take this framework at kind of face value, it's sort of chill, right? It's like, well, dude, I just told you it's 60, 70 or like 90 odd plus. By definition, there's nothing to do here. But there is,
Yeah.
but on the trade, from a trading perspective, like it's still been pretty fucking volatile, like moderately volatile in the interim. And I feel like a lot of what's playing out at the moment is obviously kind of news correlation stuff going on. But it feels like a lot of the market is also looking for local signs of a failed breakdown, if that makes sense. And we sort of touched on this the first time around, where the argument was, yeah, 70K is like the big level. But like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we did discuss like round number under 80K type of tag, right? At least on BTC. I feel like that's most of what's going on at the moment. Like we had that wick down on the 28th that set the low. And then as the market tried to push through it a few days ago on the 10th, it actually held up. So I think you could almost like split the market in two at the moment, where if you're going from like a, I guess, more conservative, passive, super high time frame oriented perspective, there's fuck all to do here because your areas to do something are 90 plus or 60, 70. And then if you're in the perp trenches, to whatever degree they exist, type of trading, then you're using sub 80K round number as like a low time frame invalidation, evidence of absorption type of thing. Do you think that's fair? Is there anything else from a technical perspective that's going on?
No, I think that's pretty fair. I generally I expected it to kind of like bottom out around 80K, just like from how I looked at the chart. I was just like, this just makes sense. The reason why I'm like not talking about it is because it's not necessarily like the technicals, the clear cut technicals. It's just the gut feeling, basically. And that's kind of like what's been holding us up, right? Like the 80K mark, it's just kind of been like every time we get close to there, we just start bouncing.
Yeah.
Last time we did it much stronger, obviously, but that was also aided by just Trump coming out. And this time around, it's a little bit weaker, but still quite sizable. But I think it's also just largely dependent on the S&P just not disappearing. We've seen a little bit of relative strength the last couple of days, but just generally, like we are in Trump land now. Like Trump is dominating the market, and we're all just playing in it. And every time you see like a move, like literally every time I was like, this is odd. Like, why are people buying here? Like 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes later, Trump news come out on like multiple, like on XRP, on Bitcoin, like on all of it. It's kind of like it's an insider game now, where you have edge if you're an insider, you have edge if this is the kind of market that you thrive in, but just as a normal trader, like it's very different from how it used to be. So like, I think for the edgeless trader, you're just gonna get farmed by insiders if you're trading this. But I mean, it's just how it is right now. Like you've seen a lot of kind of front running of news. You've seen all kinds of weird shit happening. Crypto is kind of like starting to turn into a battleground of sorts for like, I mean, we've seen a lot of like shady behavior on crypto, but this is like on an institutional level now. So it's a little bit, I think it's easy to be taken advantage of, but also like, I mean, a 30% drawdown from the top, right, is kind of attractive to look for buys. Like it just makes sense. Like any bear, like people always like whip out the bear market talk whenever Bitcoin's down 30-40%. If you think back when we started like doing this professionally, right, in 2017, this was normal, right? Like this is a normal thing. And I mean, just generally every single bull market, this has been normal that Bitcoin draws down 30-40% and then makes new highs. So I get why people would be antsy and kind of wanna get some action. And I'm not necessarily against it, right? Like I think like 80K is quite a good spot. It's just a clear trade to me as a washed up, lazy boomer is, and I also have exposure, right, already. If I didn't, then I would be more aggressive here. But it's just looking for 90K and looking for lower than 70K. It's just how I look at it as a boomer.
No, I think that's completely fair, and it's a kind of pick your poison thing. If you want to be in the intraday trenches without the full backing of the higher time frames, then you're definitely trading the exactly 30% discount 80K round number setup. Like that's just what's on the menu. If you're high time frame oriented, as discussed, you've got some waiting to do, and that can be 90 plus, could be 70 plus, but it kind of doesn't matter. They're both valid high time frame setups, but it's not at 80 if you're sort of strictly high time frame oriented. I mean, dude, I just like have these levels on the daily chart, basically like 90, 80, 70, 60.
Yeah.
And there's something just like really nice about it, you know? And a lot of the time that's obviously non-quantitative bullshit TA drawn chart analysis. But like if you've been trading Bitcoin long enough, you know that it does love to dabble in the esoteric, right? Like moving averages that have no business being as powerful as they are just attract a lot of sort of order herding type of behavior, which makes it real. Same with all these big breakout, breakdown type reclaim levels. They just attract a lot of participation, and it almost doesn't matter whether that the level of reasoning is sort of impressive or not, or like, oh, that's not a valid argument, it's just arbitrary, so on and so forth. Like at the end of the day, if it attracts order flow, then it's interesting from a trading perspective. It's the same thing as like, you know, people who critique weekly close or daily close and all that type of stuff, saying, oh, well, it's a 24/7 market, so there's no close really. It's like, I feel like that's sort of first order thinking. But then if the second order effect is that even in the 24/7 market, people like these technical landmarks of weekly high, weekly low, weekly open, weekly close, daily, this, that, and the other, and then people actually trade around it, then it becomes, I think, enough of a self-fulfilling prophecy and becomes real enough to where you kind of have to trade it, or at least it's no longer valid to ignore it. Like even if you think the underlying reason for a market effect is shit, if there's a market effect, like then it becomes valid by definition, in my view, you know? I mean, it's just like altcoin move, you know, like if an altcoin moves 50, 100% because of some news, and you sit there in the weeds being like, oh, well, you know, the news is bullshit, therefore the market shouldn't have moved. It's like, well, it did move, you know, we're here now. Whether you think the participants are rational or not for trading that piece of news in the way they did, it's almost secondary at that point, because clearly it did have some sort of impact. I mean, the news is like a bad example because you can, in theory, look at the details and see if the whole move up is bullshit or not. But an example would be like a partnership announcement, right? Like imagine it's like, oh, there's like a partnership announcement and the market's rallying and they're front running it or whatever else, and you who were around in 2018 are like, oh, well, this isn't a new partnership, therefore the market shouldn't move. It's like, well, it kind of doesn't matter how real it is. It's more how it's like a Keynesian beauty contest. It's not who you think is the most beautiful. You have to bet on what the average person is going to choose as their beauty standard, you know? I know that was like a stupid kind of unhinged rant. I've just seen a lot of this very recently where people look at like real market effects that clearly exist and are moving the market, and then almost kind of discount them out of existence because they're not happy with the philosophical underpinnings of that type of trading or participation. And I just feel like it's needlessly overcomplicating things. Like whether you like it or not, it seems to matter, you know? And that's kind of my point with BTC. It's like with these round numbers and these fucking moving averages and these random lines and triangles, you in a vacuum, you can sit and make a very compelling critique of all of those things having any validity. But the real test is going to be, does it work? Do people trade around it? And if the answer is yes, then I think you should care, you know?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to be right or do you want to make money? Because at the end of the day,
version, 100%.
Like at the end of the day, like yeah, you're right. It's a 24/7 market. It really shouldn't matter, but that's just not how it works. And this is why the closes matter, because enough people look at it. That's just
exactly. Yeah, so it attracts real, you know, there's an order herding, order clustering, a real market effect there. And it'd be almost anti-trader to notice this thing and then almost ignore it and say, well, I'm not going to trade it because like it's bullshit and crypto is 24/7. It's like, forget why it's happening. Like there is a market effect and there could be alpha there. Like, are you going to trade it or not at the end of the day?
Completely. I mean, at the end of the day, like it actually doesn't really matter why it happens.
Exactly.
As long as you take advantage of it.
Yes.
So.
Like it's there. You know, doesn't matter how we got here. It's like the genetic fallacy, right? Sort of this. discrediting something because of its origins or how that belief came about. It's not a one-to-one perfect example, but it's sort of the same thing. So you can sit there and philosophize or be smart, or you can say, well, there's alpha here or there's edge, and I'm going to work around it. And I think daily close, weekly close, opens, and candle highs and lows, all these round number things, moving averages. I would caution anyone against being too sort of intellectual about them, especially in a market like crypto and certainly in Bitcoin, which seems to love this type of shit. It's the same with drawdowns, right? Like the whole 30-40% thing. There's nothing like inherently magical about an asset going down 30-40%. It just kind of becomes self-fulfilling prophecy after enough times. People will see that and then put actual bids in the order book, right? And that's a very real effect, even if the reasoning for those bids existing isn't like super compelling in a philosophical vacuum. So I think we're seeing some of that 80k, by the way. Hit that 80. It's a round number. It hit that discount bull market correction type of sweet spot, and it had a second stab that got absorbed. So I think there's a lot of that going on, even if from a technical point of view, it hasn't reached like the most obvious level in the world. Yeah. Like there's a reason it was below the round number than any other level on the way down. Yep.
I mean, just generally, even when you just think about like the whole like situation that we're in with crypto at large, it's rarely been better, right? Like Trump is clearly trying to push crypto forward, clearly trying to be involved in it as much as he can. And that is like a big difference to prior administration, right? Like crypto was just getting nuked left and right. And now it's basically like crypto is winning everywhere. And people kind of don't take that serious because the price is going down right now, which I always find interesting, right? When you get like major shifts in how this thing is looked at from like a traditional point of view, and price goes down, people are like, oh yeah, this is non-news, but it's not, right? Like this is significant still. And the moment you actually turn around, the moment basically this whole like tariff thing stops nuking markets, I think like Bitcoin and crypto as a whole is probably gonna like bounce much harder than anything else. Like it's a little bit like a bouncy ball, like being held underwater, and then the moment you let go, as in the moment, kind of like the kamikaze stuff that Trump is doing right now with the U.S. economy. Once that stops, I think it's gonna be quite aggressive to the upside on crypto things, just because like the regulatory landscape has shifted so massively. So like I said, I think just generally like TA wise, this is clearly bearish. Like we talked about the monthly, that's a bearish retest, like a pretty shitty one, but still a bearish retest. The weekly is the loss of a range. That's also clearly bearish. We've had that a couple times to the upside, right? Like a range breakout, and that was clearly bullish the entire way up. Now we've lost the range, and this time it's much more clean, right? Like when we kind of like chopped around 60k, the range was much less defined, and we were just kind of chopping around it. Now this range loss is kind of obvious, right? It's the most obvious we've had. So technically speaking, that's bearish. And then you have, when we go down like a time frame on the daily time frame, you could draw in 80k support like we talked about, but really there's nothing too exciting about the chart itself, other than that round number, right? So like you go through time frames and it's all kind of shit, but then you look at how crypto is perceived around the world, and especially in America, and that's changed massively. So I think you get the first bullish kind of technicals, and you're gonna see a lot of people just kind of completely FOMO into this thing, which is why I think like you reclaim 90k even on the daily. It's what I talked about like a couple of days ago when you retested 90k from the downside, from the downside. I was like, this is the best bearish setup. The reason why I said it's the best bearish setup is because it would be the best bullish setup if it's flipped, right? And it's still the case. If we come back to 90k, flip it on the daily time frame or on the weekly or on the monthly, doesn't really matter. The daily is just the fastest moving out of all of them. I think you could see some nice price action. It's just we need a little bit of that, and we need Trump to kind of stop suiciding the US markets. Once both of those things happen, I think you're gonna see actually like surprisingly strong price action again.
Nice. Yeah, it's always this weird disconnect with regard to US crypto regulation and whatever else. But then other forces come into play, like, macro correlation, S&P. And also, like, some of it is just purely leverage driven to some extent, like around the headlines. And people were expecting a lot from the strategic reserve. And I think also, and I think we discussed this last week, had higher price. A lot of the strategic reserve stuff was baked into the run up in the first place. Certainly from like the 80 to 100 leg, for example, like during the course of the range itself. And then people's expectations are like disproportionately high, it feels like, around the event. So I mean, we can sit and talk about this all day. I think the discussion on like order flow and self-fulfilling prophecies is interesting. On the TA side, it's actually a lot less interesting and more. It is like pretty just technical. I think your time frame breakdown is really good. There's just like a lot of stuff that broke down, bearishly retested, and is below reclaim levels. Like that seems to be factually true. And it's like, okay, well, what do I do with that? And the decision tree that I've always used, and I think you've used a similar version, is, breakdown, which looks bad. You need a reason to get involved in the market, because at face value, if it looks shit, then you should treat it like shit until it suggests otherwise. And the way it can suggest otherwise is via deep discount or via reclaim. And so then if you go one step further, where is the deep discount? It could be as early as 80, right? Like if it's a really aggressive bull market type of thing, just taps 30%, and everything else, the correlation wins, headwinds move off. That could be enough, certainly. But if you want like a proper deep discount, we're talking like high time frame levels, which are 70-ish. And then if you're talking about the reclaim, well, where did and this is generally a good question to ask if you want to be on the conservative side. Where did the breakdown take place, or where did the last successful bearish retest take place? And I think in this case, the answer converges both ways around like 93, 94. So, just deconstructing that from top to bottom, you're left with 70K-ish, 93, 94K-ish for like big trades. And then intraday, which I would put like in its own category completely, is 80K round number. That's it, I think.
Yeah, well said.
Actually, don't diddle in the middle. Just wait for the new all-time high break for confirmation. There we go. Actually, this is the best answer available.
Yeah, almost.
Not all charts look this way, though, Don. I'm wondering if you have any more ETH BTC lies up your sleeve, because
I keep saying it's shit. There's no lie there. No, I mean, chart looks like shit on ETH BTC. Chart looks like poo on ETH USD.
Let's talk about ETHUSD for a sec. If my trading view ever decides to come back to life, which is inherently
ETHUSD monthly. There's
monthly.
There's one level that you can draw that we're kind of trading below right now.
My God, my trading view is taking a lifetime. I'm sorry. I'm here with you.
I hate that. So like at 2.265 ish, I have a level that we're kind of like trading below, which would be a breakdown if we start closing below it.
Oh, is it like the lowest monthly close from fucking June or some shit, and we wicked into it and all that stuff?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of been holding the market both ways, right? Like that's where we started exploding to the upside.
Okay.
Twice actually, right? Like first time in February 2024, and then again in November 2024. But also, like we've tested that level a couple of times now, we're trading below it, right? But basically, if you wanna be at all bullish, I think this has to close above that level again. Otherwise, it's just like we lost that range, that kind of like that support that we've had on a high time frame. You can obviously make an argument like, hey, 1.9K was the thing capping it, but I like 2.2K better. But if you wanna be that guy, then that's your line in the sand. For me, it kind of like the fact that we're trading at 2.2 and found support there before kind of invalidates the 1.9K level, but like people can draw levels differently, and I think it's totally fine. But for me, like above 2.2, you can make an argument for this being a nice buy. But until then, I mean, it's just like been a garbage chart. It's still a garbage chart. And just generally, when you go on the lower time frames, it takes even more to repair this. I've been saying like, hey, reclaim 2.8K, and then I'm willing to add leverage. That's still the case, right? Like 2.8K, which is on the weekly time frame. There's a cluster, a resistance cluster there. That's kind of what I want to see reclaimed, and then maybe I'll start adding leverage. Otherwise, I'll just sadly stare at this chart and be like, it's just depressing.
Are you in ETH spot bag holding mode essentially at the moment?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just basically like, I genuinely think if the cycle is not over, ETH's probably gonna surprise us towards the end of the cycle, and I'm willing to just sit through that. I don't really care too much. But obviously, if the cycle's over, that'd be fucking sad, right? Because if the Bitcoin cycle's over and the ETH cycle would probably be over too, then it's basically just one of the worst assets this cycle, and then I'll just take a moderately sized L and move on with my life.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, 17 days to rescue the monthly TM, but I agree. I think the lower time frames are going to be a bit more helpful. This is another chart where I feel like the tourist coming in and checking it out perspective is super helpful because there's no pre-existing bias for ETH to like outperform or do anything else. I think if I were coming into this market, had no idea what it was, what time frame, and so on, I'd look at the 4K range as the range high, and then I'd look on the ooh, this is sorry, my trading view is not helping today. I'd look at the 4K sort of area as the range high, and then what, like 2K as the range low, and it
on
just
the weekly time frame, right?
Yes, on the weekly, and it just looks like a failed breakout to the upside into a seemingly real breakdown to the downside. And, you know, if someone said, where would you want exposure on this thing? We can essentially follow the same logic, which is to say either a deep discount or a reclaim of the range. The reclaim of the range part is pretty straightforward. That's like, what, 2.2, 2.3K plus, basically. Yeah. Of course, then you have to make other considerations come into play. Like if you're going to add risk on the long side, do you want it to be ETH versus like BTC or other stuff? Like fine, just ignoring all of that and looking at ETH at the moment from a purely TA perspective. It's like 2.2K plus for the failed breakdown. I think the more interesting question is like, where is the deep discount part of it for ETH? Because I don't think it's 1.9K. Because if 1.9K holds up, then it's more likely to lead to the 2.2K reclaim setup, and you can get the risk on that way. But it's only like, I mean, it's like 15%-ish at the moment below the range low. It's getting there. Like it's not a trivial breakdown. But if we take the proper deep discount argument like we did for BTC, which is like 70K, 60K, monthly, high time frame, whatever shit, like is there an equivalent for ETH? Are you going to tell me it's the 1946 level, please?
I mean, I would argue that we're kind of there.
We're there, okay.
Like if you looked at this like 3 weeks ago, you would be like, where's the deep discount level? I would argue it's exactly here.
The 1936 one, right?
Yeah, 1936. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be the bottom because of it, right? And it's been underperforming Bitcoin this entire cycle. But like to me, just looking at the chart, like the deep discount level is 2K, like the 19 whatever level. And if you like the next level, when you want to like be aggressive, right? Like where it's like the deep discount beyond the deep discount, I mean, that has to be 1.5, 1.4. But that at that point, basically the entire market is imploding, right? So kind of like I would argue we're there. On Bitcoin, we're not. On ETH, we're there. But that's not necessarily like that might make you think like, hey, I should be buying ETH, and could be a good idea, might not. But it could also be just a terrible sign, right? Like when something's already at a fucking deep discount level while Bitcoin is chilling above support, like what happens when Bitcoin goes to support?
Discount your discount season.
Yeah. But I would argue like just straight up, like objectively without all the, ETH's just been fucking everyone. Like that's like we are trading at the deep discount level.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a round number. That's pretty good cope, right?
Yeah. I mean, we'll see if we close above 2K this week.
No, yeah, that's a good, yeah. I mean, look, I don't spend much time thinking about ETH, if that makes sense. Like given ETH BTC performance, it's just
Yeah.
been like wholly uninteresting. There have been some decent trades within it in terms of like how well it's adhered to some of these levels, so it's interesting in that regard. But
Yeah.
like if you have like a weekly range breakdown in BTC and you think it's finally getting discounted and you're like, oh my god, I've like avoided the worst part of it. Let me finally put on some risk. I just like at the moment for me at least, ETH doesn't really make the top of my list for that, you know. But I agree, like in a vacuum, I think 1935 you kind of have to hope is going to work, and there's some month that's like the highest monthly close breakout level as well. So you've got that going for you. But I think it's just like in terms of on the TA side, it's a bit like close to 2.2k, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe when it was at the wick low, it wasn't like 1700 or whatever. If you're taking that for a spin, I think that's reasonable. But just like the eye test suggests that those levels are pretty close together. And if I have the choice of like buying an ETH support level hoping it's strong, or buying a reclaim like because it's strong, for me personally at this point, I'd probably opt for the latter,
Yeah.
with a bit clearer risk definition as well. But also another problem with ETH, and this is a weird point to make, but I think you'll get it. Like when BTC breaks down from a range and makes its way back to the breakdown point, a lot of the time that's bullish, right? Like as dumb as that sounds from a purely baby pips perspective, Bitcoin is not very good at adhering to those types of bearish retests where support turns to resistance and it comes all the way back. It's just not a very Bitcoin centric setup. ETH is different in that regard. I don't know if you agree, but like ETH is much more friendly towards bearish retests or like broken support turn resistance. And we had a case of that at like 2.9k, for example, right? And historically, we've had instances of that around, 2k as well, acting as resistance. The most obvious one being the 2022 August retest and just getting stuffed at 3k for a while. So for that reason, I think, if I'm buying the discounted level at 1.9 or whatever else this weekly structure is, if this were BTC and it makes its way back to the bearish retest level, I'm just thinking, holy shit, I was right. Like I bought the support and it's coming into former support and resistance, but it's not a market that very much likes bearish retests, so I quite like my odds. Even if I don't, I'm not going to be super pressured to close into the TA bearish retest or the first trouble area. But I didn't feel like ETH affords you that luxury, at least as comfortably. Whereas, if you buy the discounted level and it comes into previous support turn resistance, on BTC, I care less. On ETH, I really care because it seems to respect those more often than not. And so if I want to avoid that shitty decision tree dilemma, I'm like, well, just reclaim the level in the first place and then we can talk. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Yeah, it does. I think it's the most sensible way to look at it. And it's also the way I'm going to play leverage, basically.
The leverage side? So leverage unlock for you is 2.2k plus.
Yeah,
Okay.
2.2k plus monthly close would be a good start.
Okay.
And if we don't do that, if we close below it, I would need quite a bit more even. Like if we kind of have shit price action for the next 2 weeks and then close below 2.2, I would probably want to have a daily close above 2.8k. And I'm totally fine with that. Like I think generally, and this is the case with a lot of altcoins, like once they turn around aggressively and people start fading it quite early because they're so used to it just forever going down. But like, even if you're missing the first leg of these altcoin moves, usually they have a second leg in store. So that's kind of what I'm like. If it goes above 2.8 and I get a good setup there, I'd be more than happy to take that trade on leverage rather than just jumping in while it's bleeding still. So that's kind of how I look at it. Pretty similar to what you just described. It's just a rough chart.
Yes.
Same with ETH BTC. ETH BTC to me is clearly capitulating right now. This is what we set to wait for in 2023.
Jesus.
But it can capitulate much longer than you can stay solvent, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think time-wise, we're pretty damn close to this bottoming, right? Like, I think like you have another candle like the last 2 or 3 monthlies that we had on ETH BTC, like as in like 1, 2, 3 more months of this. And I think there's almost no chance that we don't put in like a significant bounce. But those 3 candles could put us down like 50%, right? And then no one that already bought, especially not on leverage, would be very happy with it. So like that's the problem with capitulation. I think it's very, very fair to call this capitulation right now, but it can go on for a while. And if you're sitting in it, having bought early capitulation, you might actually be the fuel to capitulate late, right? Like the capitulation can start and you can buy it, and then you can still be part of the of the final capitulation
Yeah.
wick. And that's danger that a lot of people underestimate, especially like I said, trading on leverage, where
Yeah.
people can force you to sell, even if you like, even if you like the price. I mean, if you're forced to sell, you're forced to sell.
Margin requirements are margin requirements, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same with like shorting blow off top type of stuff. It's like, oh, this move is the blow off top. I'm going to short. It's like, you were right. It just wicked 40% higher than you thought, and your account is gone, you know?
Yep. Exactly.
Live by the leverage, die by the leverage. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, there isn't like a massive. I mean, ETH is obviously weaker than BTC, but in terms of high time frame TA stuff, it's kind of a similar story, right? Where you just have like a multi-week, multi-month range breakdown, and like that's it. That's the main theme, and everything else is going to be subtext. I feel like,
Yep.
until you start reaching those discounted levels. I also agree with your analysis. Like, if ETH has been so much weaker, and you're waiting for, you don't have like a clear sign from BTC yet. Like, let's say you're waiting for the super high time frame stuff and it's not there. I just don't think ETH has done enough to prove that you should be front running BTC support and using ETH as the means of doing so. You know, it's like, I'm going to buy the weaker asset at a contextually weaker area in the market type of thing. So yeah, it's a very similar story. I mean, roadmap wise, it's kind of as we discussed. 2.2k is your earliest high time frame strength level. 1.9 ish is like arguable discount. It's already wicked a fair bit lower, which I think helps a little bit. But those are like the reasonably closely sandwiched together levels to play. And then you need to keep in mind that looking at these things in a vacuum, at least if you're purely trading crypto, is tricky, because like ETH BTC is still a chart that matters. And then where BTC ultimately finds support still matters. Like we've both traded a ton of cases. There's like a really good level on an altcoin, but BTC isn't quite there yet. And then BTC puts in that final leg. The alt sort of wicks pretty deeply through that support, but then BTC bounces and the altcoin recovers, and the end product is that like the level's held, but because of that final BTC leg, you get wicked out of the good altcoin level if you're too cute with it and trying to get too precise and too tight. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
You're like, oh, like we're pretty much there. This level is so good on this altcoin, and BTC is like almost there. And so you buy the altcoin, and then fucking BTC goes down 5%, and your level gets wicked by what? 10% or something, and like just that difference can be enough to get you out of a good trade. Like on the outside, it looks like the same trade. Like I bought the high time frame level of support, but if you don't give enough room for that, you know, that kind of spillover effect from BTC actually bottoming, that can be pretty expensive. There are no easy answers as with most of this stuff. I just prefer bigger picture, I prefer not looking at ETH for those purposes. But if I had to, it would be on the back of strength and not on the back of hoping support holds or like front running BTC. I mean, all of this is going to be probably pretty correlated once BTC decides to go up properly, right? So timing BTC, I think, is much more important than picking the right ETH or altcoin level, fundamentally, as is often the case. Cool. Do you want to talk about the S&P, or do you want to jump to Solana or any other shitters? XRP, for God's sake.
I mean, XRP is trading better than the rest.
Better than most things, yeah. I mean, it hasn't even had the weekly breakdown yet, right? Like, it didn't make a low close on the weekly.
Like, you look on the weekly and it's not that bad.
Yeah, just
like,
a massive head and shoulders with a measured move target of, I think, 8 cents.
How are you making it? I can see it on the daily. I'm struggling to see it on the weekly.
Yeah, you see, I just made it up.
You're talking about like if we bounced now to 2.5, that'd be the right shoulder.
Well, no, you could just take the high of the 25th of November, the highest close to the left, the highest close full stop, and the recent highest close before the red candle.
Yeah, well, that's an ugly as fuck red.
I've been banished from the Peter Brandt Classical Chartists Academy after calling that head and shoulders.
Because you could argue that like if it bounces now towards like 2.58, that'd be a clean head and shoulders. Like then you would have like a high at 2.58, then the head towards 3.2, and now like if we bounce from here towards 2.58, that'd be the right shoulder. It'd be actually pretty straight.
Great.
But no, like that one's actually quite surprising because everything's imploding, right? Like
Sure.
you look at ETH USD and you're like, holy shit. You look at Solana USD and you're like, holy shit. And then you look at XRP and you're like, like that's fine. Impressive relative strength, but that's not enough, obviously. Like I'm not gonna be happy if I'm just relatively strongly losing money. But so far so good. I generally think XRP is one of the coins that is gonna benefit the most from the market going up. It's been holding so strong during this entire downturn that I think the strength during an upturn would be insane. That said, it's obviously also one of the biggest market caps now. It flipped Ethereum in full diluted value actually yesterday or the day before. So technically speaking,
Wow, that is disgusting, dude.
Technically speaking, it's the second biggest crypto now. It's kind of insane, right? Like I shilled this when it was barely top 10, and now it's like flipping ETH. Yeah, good times, good times. But yeah, I think that's like if the market continues to go up, this is gonna be one of the best ones. As sad, that's gonna make a lot of people. It doesn't really matter. Like people hate assets and they still go up. It's the same with me and TRX, right? Like I fucking dislike it. I hope it goes to zero, but it still has been holding strong since 2017. So is what it is. Sometimes you just gotta get over your feelings, even though I'm not gonna trade TRX. So I might not be the right guy to give that kind of advice.
Not the right guy to fund the presidential pardon, allegedly,
No,
in
no,
Minecraft. Not even a
Jesus
pardon,
Christ.
just favorable. I mean,
Yeah.
this is like science
Yeah.
fiction. I mean, it's science fiction level of corruption, or corruption you'd expect anywhere outside of like the G whatever number you want to use.
Yeah, I mean that's Banana Republic
Yeah,
shit.
yeah, yeah. It's Banana Republic
Like
type of behavior.
straight up just like insane. You think about like an African country where you have to bribe the policemen to kind of cross,
To live.
even though yeah, it's just to you want to do anything, you have to bribe someone. It's kind of how it goes now in how it feels like just from the outside, how it feels like to be in crypto right now. Like you pay Trump enough, allegedly in Minecraft,
Yeah.
and you are good. And if you don't, then I mean, tough luck. It's insane. It's insane that people seriously talked about like whether Sam Bankman-Fried would get a pardon if he just cozied up to the Republic inside. And then this was a serious consideration to a lot of people.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
yeah.
what the fuck kind of like world are we living
I
in
mean,
now?
World Liberty Fi shouldn't exist in like a normal functioning country.
Like utterly insane. Like the
Yeah.
stuff that they've been accused of, right?
Yes.
I don't know if this is like in the media as much, but I mean I've seen a lot like accusations of basically you have to send like you send us coins and we buy the same amount, like we buy a bunch to kind of
Yes.
make it look like we're supporting the project. These kind of accusations that like if you look at the on-chain activity kind of seem plausible, right? At least.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fucking insane.
It's insane. It's insane. And this is like these are the close family members, like sons of the sitting president of the United States. You know,
Yeah.
It's like completely inappropriate. And the whole thing about a conflict of interest is not that it has to be used or something actually happens. It's the fact that the perception of the scope for potential impropriety is just as bad as the impropriety taking place. Like it doesn't matter. Like if it can happen, it's almost as well as that it has happened. Explained clumsily, you know. That's like the whole reason we have like conflicts checks, whatever. It doesn't mean you actually did something, but if you're in a position where you could do something, that's bad enough. You know, you've lost it at that point. It's like there's no reason for World Liberty Financial whatever to exist. It's too close to the sitting president, and with crypto, it's just clearly going to be used by bad actors, pay to play. And it's the same, you know. Nick Carter, I think, is like at least very philosophically consistent. I say at least as if I've got some other criticism. Like I just like his writing and views on the regulatory stuff. And he's spent more time thinking about this than what most people in the world, I imagine. Like from an early stablecoin maxi before any like ETF or whatever else. But like, why the fact that the strategic reserve exists, for example, I'm not personally a huge fan of, because it's sort of a, to some extent, a politically charged centralizing power, and you always have to think like, what happens when the guys I don't like get into power? Like, how would these powers be used? And I don't want, and I think this is the joke version, it's like President Ocasio-Cortez full stack Hitlering.
Dude, you know they would.
They would. Yeah, day one, it's like, we need to fund whatever government program, just FSH on the old BTC reserve, Like, I just don't like that type of stuff. And there are reasons, there are reasons that they're all campaign finance in the US after Citizens United is a whole other disaster. But at least in terms of like proximity to the president himself, he like shouldn't be launching coins, and his sons shouldn't be running a pay-to-play crypto platform. Like, is that really so much to fucking ask for?
Completely insane.
Apparently
man.
it is. But yeah, XRP is still like benefiting from the crime cycle,
I legit think, and it was one of the 3 coins that he mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And this is also like another insane thing that happened, right? And people try to explain it away, but it's completely insane that Trump went on Truth Social and tweeted like, "Hey, we want to have like a strategic reserve of XRP, ADA, and what was it, Solana, right?"
Yes.
And then, like 2 hours later, he's like, "Yeah, and of course, Bitcoin and ETH too." And then a day or two later, Sachs just goes on air and it's like, "Yeah, he just mentioned these because they were the biggest coins," and they're absolutely not. Like, like just straight up not the case.
I know.
Like, you have BNB is bigger. You have a lot of like stuff, and obviously, like this is not behavior that you can realistically.
Did you see him signing the executive order? He couldn't give less of a fuck.
No.
Like, I don't want to fully trash the entire admin, because it's clear that like from the SEC's behavior and just the regulatory environment, it's just way, 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 way better. And I think giving the CFTs like an SEC that doesn't capriciously, and we absolutely dragged Gensler's SEC for good reason, because there was no adherence to like due process. There's no sound reasoning behind their enforcement action. It was enforcement via litigation. They tell people they want to register and then basically not let them register and sue them for it. Like, it was a fucking disaster. But why do we have to replace shit with shit? Like, on the SEC side, it's a lot better. But the price for paying for regulatory clarity is just like more insider laden crime, just on a seemingly higher level. And it's like can we have a trade-off that's not a trade-off? Can we just like improve things? So yeah, I think it's probably going to be a net plus, because really a lot of this
crypto,
stuff,
yes.
Yeah, for crypto, because a lot of the stuff, the worst stuff, was coming directly as a regulatory headwind. So like, it's good not to have that. But then the crime and corruption costs to pay in the interim for it isn't particularly great either.
Yeah, and I think it's a plus still for crypto.
I agree. It's net positive.
Yes, but I can also I can also be convinced that it's a minus, honestly, just by the faith in crypto being lost.
Sure.
Like, when you see the highest level of government kind of like use crypto to grift, as a normal person, are you going to assume that crypto is anything else but a grift? And I think the answer is pretty clear, right? Like, if you've already kind of like stayed away, this is just going to push you away more. But regulatory wise, this is a much better admin than the one prior.
Yes,
it's just insane, because like technically, I think like the stuff that this administration, like especially the Trump family, like I think that the administration is actually fine. Like, it's just the Trump family stuff that they're doing, like that should go in front of judges and in front of the court, and they should take punishment for it, in my opinion. Like, this is completely inexcusable, unacceptable stuff, right? But also, like, they're doing some things that are long overdue, where it's like, as a crypto person, it's really hard to kind of like shit on them for their crypto behavior, because they're already done much more on the regulatory side than we've ever seen from the prior admin. So it's kind of it's a mixed bag, but I wish we didn't like legitimize kind of like grifting and like straight up crime more, because we
Yes.
already have way too much of that. Like we need less of that, not more of it. And what we're getting is much, much more of it.
I think it's kind of it's a failure on our part as an industry to some extent. Because another way to look at it is that, okay, the regulatory environment has changed. The reins are off. The shackles have been taken away. What are you going to do about it? And everyone's like, just looks at each other like, steal, crime, fraud. You
Yeah.
know, it's like it was an opportunity. It was almost like a mirror, right? And like, you sort of, let's see who you really are if these headwinds are going to go away and the US becomes like pro crypto. What do you lean into? Do you start launching tokens with the fee switch turned on? Do you take some real risk? And we have seen some of that, but it just like maybe it's happened to coincide, unfortunately, with where we were in the cycle. But like the first thing that came to people's mind in a more regulatory favorable environment was to just like steal and commit as much crime as possible. So
It's so fucking sad though.
yeah, I mean, it's almost like, you know, like during the pandemic and stuff, when you had the lockdowns, depending on your country and all this type of shit, and then people were like, oh, you know, if it weren't for lockdowns, I'd be like going to the gym 6 days a week and going for walks every single day, and like I'm being so restricted. And then the lockdowns fuck off, and then you actually have a chance to do all that type of stuff, and you don't do any of it. It feels very similar here. Like you get the freedom that you've been harping on about for so long, and how you're going to do all these amazing things, and how the industry is like being pushed towards the crime stuff because we don't have regulatory clarity, etc. Like the worst of it goes away, and then you still steal and choose the crime route. So I think it's a crypto problem as well.
Yeah. I mean, I did have like a couple like trusted kind of members of our kind of community come to me after like Trump launch and in that kind of time frame, and people were like, I never did anything like questionable in front of like it's like just morally questionable, but am I being an idiot for not doing it now? Like I had a lot of those kind of conversations with people that like didn't really like go for like any monetization or anything. And I mean, like I think a lot of people got shaken basically because they felt like they're being idiots for not doing it. Because if you see Trump come in and basically make billions, right? And then a lot of other people in the community also sold out because crime is now legal. Like even the ones that stayed away from it started kind of like faltering a bit. And I think that's a lot of damage done basically. I wish that wasn't the case. I think people, um, I see a lot of people arguing like that the regulatory landscape has gotten so much better, and I agree. But I think the damage that is done by this kind of behavior is kind of understated as well. Like you cannot like the moment you legitimize this kind of behavior, even the ones that try to do good are gonna get shaken. And it's just like long term, like really bad.
I mean,
So
that's been the cycle as a whole, right? It's like a microcosm. Like if you're entering crypto and you want to be like an actual builder, it's like, why the fuck would you do that? You see devs with 1/100th of your skill, if that. They just lean into the marketing rug extraction thing and get paid for it, and the consequences at worst are like unclear, right? Like you're not even
yeah,
getting a Zach thread these days. There's a real bear market for
fucking sad,
yeah,
man.
yeah, exactly. So we sort of the pendulum hasn't swung back yet. It feels like from the financial nihilism, max extraction type of stuff, and a lot of the recent price action and sentiment was colored by that sort of crescendo Trump, Melania, and Libra like
Yeah,
triple threat, and you know that obviously didn't feel good. And it wasn't good for the market. You know, the trenches got eviscerated straight away. Sol's been down only. People feeling defeated. Vape Cabal disappearing. The heroes that we needed in this time. So, yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot of that going on.
But like I said at the beginning of the show, like I think the positives that this has, like kind of like the positives of all of this action hasn't really been priced in either.
Okay.
I just think like the extraction obviously is immediate and has been immediate. Like the extraction from Trump coin, Melania coin, and Libra been massive, kind of eviscerated, like you said, the entire ecosystem. Um, but I also think like these positive changes have not been priced in. It's just right now we have macro troubles, and that's where the shitty price action is coming from. And the moment the macro troubles go away, and all it like realistically would take would just Trump like calming down on the terrorist stuff. And it's not like this is important for the US, right? This is just something that he's hung up on. Like if Trump stops talking about starting World War III, like by invading Greenland or by invading Canada or by like just a trade war, if any of those stop, I think we're gonna have good times, at least short term. It's just if he doesn't stop with it, if you push this further than it already is being pushed, I mean, I don't think it's a high likelihood, but if he decides to actually annex Greenland as he says he would, then we're obviously in for much, much more pain in the markets. And right now, it kind of feels like you're staring down the Trump gun, right? Like the barrel of the Trump gun. And if he fires, you're fucked. And if if he doesn't, you're gonna live to see another day. And you kind of have to decide whether you're fine with that risk being in the market or not.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of S&P spillover. What I can't tolerate, Don, is that real gold is mooning and digital gold is just like breaking down from its consolidation and stuff.
Yeah, the reason why I think is because like legit, like crypto is kind of like a Republican thing now, you know. And if Trump's image takes a hit, and I think this terror stuff, as much as people want to deny it, I think is like hitting Trump's image very, very hard. People don't really give a fuck too much about all of this. They just want to have like make money, keep their money, whatever. And as long as that's like, as long as his image basically goes down, we're kind of like a little bit correlated with that now too, which is fucking annoying. Like, can we just trade like we did in 2016, 17,
God,
18?
no, we can't. Let me answer
Like,
that straight away. Also, surely, like the fact, like the reputational thing, I understand, but surely that's secondary to just in general being correlated with the S&P as a risk
Oh
asset,
yeah, of
right?
course.
Okay.
Yes.
Just before people
That's
jump
the
down your
main.
throat, as like,
Oh
look,
yeah,
Don thinks
no.
BTC is going down because of Trump's reputation. That's how strong his Trump
Oh
derangement
yeah.
syndrome is. Doesn't realize that it's the S&P correlation, risk asset, yada yada.
It's
Throw me a
trading
fucking
like
lifeline here, bro. Like,
yeah,
take
thank
it.
you. No. People are so delusional. They like obviously like for me, this is not even worth talking about, right? Like this is obviously like we've always traded like a tech stock with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Tech stocks are completely nuking. Tesla is basically going to zero. It's unsurprising that our market is doing worse than gold.
Yeah.
Like if you saw Tesla at new all-time highs, gold doing well, and crypto down, I'd be like
We
very
failed.
very concerned. Yeah, we failed. But like it is right now, this kind of makes sense. Like we're a little bit like a tech stock. Trump has, like I said, we've aligned ourselves with Trump as an industry. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons basically. But it is kind of fucking annoying to see gold do well and crypto not, because gold is so fucking stupid.
I agree, but like liquidity profile, unfortunately, we're much closer to the S&P and growth than we are to gold. You know.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll change in our
Holy shit,
lifetimes.
the gold chart.
I know.
Did you pull it up?
Mate, the
Holy
gold chart
fuck.
is absolutely mental. Oh, why did it load Pyth? No, ew.
Holy shit.
Oh, I'm typing in ZAO USD. That's why I'm like.
Yeah.
Can I just get a normal gold ticker? I'm just gonna type in gold.
Just put gold.
It was filtering crypto. There we go. Okay.
Yeah. But
yeah, I mean, this is what my coins should look like.
Yeah, but then you go from bottom to top and it's 180% up, and I'm
I know.
like on the monthly, like from the bottom in 2015, it's up 180%.
Yeah.
No wonder the gold people are all kind of insane.
Slow and steady wins the race, clearly. And then we're gonna have a bunch of code like, no, but if you bought gold miners on like 50x leverage, 0 DTE calls, you know. Fine, fair. Where's the S&P gonna bottom? Could you give us a quick bottom call on that?
I literally entirely reliant. Like this one is entirely reliant on Trump. Okay. Like because we had the COVID crash, right? We had the COVID crash. No matter who was president at that time, like you would have had a crash. Like it just makes sense, right? Like you have liquidity problems, the entire supply chains, everything just kind of like nuked. This makes a lot of sense, like the COVID crash, right? The current crash is not because of some event like this, right? It's not like a 2008 kind of financial bubble crisis, whatever. The current crash, if you can even call it that, I mean, it's down like what, like 10%? Yeah, the S&P is down 10%, is entirely just, this is a Trump crash, right? Like either he wants the market to crash with the stuff that he talks about, or I mean, honestly, like it's the only realistic kind of way to look at it. Like the other way to look at it is like he's a retard and he didn't understand that this would cause a crash, and I don't think he's quite that stupid. So basically, like he's just like pushing on the tariffs, and tariffs are obviously bearish for like the world economy as at large. And the more he pushes and the more this intensifies, the more the pain, like the more intense the pain will be. The moment he steps off the gas on this, we're gonna bounce. So like TA wise, you can give levels and maybe you get lucky, because that's exactly the way it turns around. But I think it's more a factor of, okay, how long is he gonna keep pushing this narrative, and how far is he willing to take the narrative of invading other countries? And a lot of the Trump fans will say like, hey, he's just saying this and he doesn't mean it. But we saw the same rhetoric about tariffs, right? Like anyone reasonable that I talked with that was Republican told me actually that this was just a negotiation tactic.
Oh, yeah, I saw the same thing. It's like, well, you think about what he sort of means, not precisely what he says, like, you know, that type of language, yeah.
And I think that's very bullshit. Like, honestly, like you cannot just be like, because then you can explain anything away,
of course,
right? Like, this is not what he means, this is just what he says. Like, this is a really stupid thing to say. It's something that drives me nuts, even like just in my private life. Like if I talk with someone and they say something but they don't mean what they say, I'm like, the fuck are you talking about, right? Like I'm not here
very German.
Like this is just to me like a very bad trait to have. Like you don't say what you mean. Like
you must be so romantic, Don. If your wife is like, you're like, you know, uses some metaphor, like you're a dandelion blowing in the soft summer breeze. Like, I am not a flower, you know, like that is not what you mean.
Exactly. No, but it's just like, I think in some, like, especially as the president of the United States, same as the president of Germany or whatever, the chancellor of Germany, like you need to be clear with what you say and what you mean. Because if everyone is interpreting what you mean and then it can just change according to whatever you want it to be, like this is just silly. And like I said, people were saying the same thing about tariffs. Like, nah, he's never going to do tariffs. And then he did. So I think this rhetoric of like, okay, we're going to annex Greenland is very dangerous. Because, I mean, in 3 months, you can just be like, hey, I told you guys 3 months ago that we're going to do this. And people are going to be like, oh, yeah, he actually did. But all the people now are like, oh, yeah, he's never going to like invade another country because obviously he won't. I think this is a little bit silly, but I also don't think it's necessarily going to happen. Like, I think the chances of it are very low. Yeah. But if he pushes that narrative, that's going to freak the markets out, obviously. Like, I cannot imagine being someone living in Greenland looking at this and being very amused, right? Like if you're living in a country that's being threatened
by the US,
by the US of all people, right? It's basically the biggest guy in school is threatening to beat the shit out of you. It's obviously not great, and that's gonna freak people out. And if people see this, they're gonna assume that it can happen to them too, right? Like if Canada is not safe, if Mexico is not safe, if Greenland is not safe, there's a lot of other countries that can defend themselves even worse than that. And that's going to freak markets out. And I think that's kind of what we're in for now. Like Trump stops this, markets go up. He doesn't, markets continue going down. And we are sadly not immune to it.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah, the spillover effect is very real. And I mean, markets don't like the uncertainty in general, to state the obvious. I also don't fully subscribe to the whole 4D interdimensional chess thing. Like, oh, it's just a way to, like, you know, do this to valuations and rates and refinance the debt, and Doge is going to save this much. And, you know, like, they spin this entire web. I mean, it's the same people in many cases who are like, oh, he's not being serious about tariffs. Like, it's a negotiating strategy. You don't get it. And then he does it. And they're like, okay, well, now you still don't get it because actually it's part of like this broader plan. And it's like, okay, there are a lot of layered assumptions here. And yeah. I'm just not sure. You know, sometimes you can give people too much credit. And I think there's some of that going on. But I mean, on your diagnosis, I agree. It's probably not going to be super technical related and more just kind of headline driven and whatever there's a lot of like systematic and passive and all these other market forces in like for indices that don't exist for crypto. And I'm just like, fucking, you always see this sell side research. Like CTAs are doing this, hedge fund managers are doing this, momentum is doing this, trend. Like, there are a lot of passive, structural, rebalancing, whatever forces at play in the S&P that don't really apply to crypto. And I'm not smart enough to have a very informed view on. But it seems from the smart people that I follow and read their stuff, a lot of they just don't like the uncertainty and the headline risk, and that's as long as that's still there, we're not in for a particularly cozy time. There is some interesting commentary how like it's not explicitly tariff/headline related, but things are a bit frothy with Nvidia and all the big raises and just equity projections in general. And I don't think that's a terrible argument, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? It's like we have in crypto when you have a super frothy market and then OI built up is crazy high and a bit of shit news comes out and the whole thing rolls over. You can poke and prod at what exactly was the causative factor, but it's never really one thing. Sometimes it's, circumstances plus appropriate trigger. And it's the job of journalists to like make up narratives after the fact and try to tell you which one was like the cause, but it's not really exactly how markets work in most cases.
Yeah, so. I think that argument is a decent one. Like just saying like, hey, we were overheated anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's somewhat refuted by the fact that if you just compare the S&P to like any other stock market in the world, right? They're actually doing just fine. Like the German stock market, like the DAX, right?
You don't have Nvidia though, Don.
Yeah, but I mean, just generally like. we have other tech companies. I mean, we don't really that much. But there's actually like there's one of the biggest kind of gainers in all of this is actually a tech company in Germany has been doing really well. The SAP.
How much exposure do you have?
Infinite. Anyway, the German index is up 25% against the S&P, and I think that says a lot. And I think that's roughly the damage that's because of like just America shooting itself in the foot. And I'm saying this quite aggressively, right? But I think this is just how it is. Like, because I think Trump, the only way he can actually lose this trade war is by fucking with everyone at once, right? Because America is that powerful, right? Like it's the biggest kid in the school by far, and he can beat up like 3 or 4 or 5 other children at the same time. But if the entire school turns on him, he's gonna get fucked, right? So if there was one way to lose this trade war, in my opinion, it's the way Trump is doing it. That's why I just don't believe in the 4D chess, because it just makes no sense. The way, like, even if you believe that the tariffs are good, even if you believe that this all makes sense, the way he's doing it is just kind of like self-sabotage in a way. So like it's kind of how I look at it. And then you see like relative outperformance in other stock markets because people are taking their money out of the American one and putting it into another one. And that's not necessarily that's not instilling confidence, right? Like people are literally less confident in the S&P than in the German stock market, even though there's war in Europe. And that's a little bit of an odd thing to happen. And I think it's entirely related to how Trump is acting right now. And I'm not saying this is a good idea, right? I'm not saying you should like rotate into German companies, because I mean, it's historically been quite a bad bet.
Yeah, not fun.
Also,
if you're like spread trading the S&P versus like global, you're a crypto guy and you're like, I'm going to start like trading the spread between global indices.
I actually like it though.
Tariff based stat arb. It's like, bro, you're probably not smart enough to do that. Come on.
I mean, me personally, like what I was looking at, I was like, I'm not really in the shorting game that much, but I was actually thinking about basically like hedging everything that I have against Tesla.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Because I was like, I think
because you hate Elon and you have Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah. No, because I basically think his like Elon's popularity has topped. There's no way, like basically the Americans might love him, the same Americans that have loved him in the last years, right? Like they're Republicans. The Democrats fucking hate him. obviously. The Europeans, I mean, I don't know how it is in your circles, but everyone around me, everyone I've talked with, fucking hates him. Especially in Germany, like, I mean, people just saw him do his hand gesture and just fucking lost their minds. Everyone's just imploding. Whether that is justified or not doesn't really make a difference, right? Like, if the Europeans fucking hate him and don't want to buy their cars, and actually, like, a lot of the Teslas around here, like, not a lot, but a bunch of them either get vandalized or get just burnt down. I think, like, just generally that, like, is him topping in popularity, because he cannot really get more popular with the Republicans in America. He's already, like, their goat. But I don't think he can necessarily go back in Europe and anywhere else. So I think that was kind of my thinking with hedging. But then I was like, fuck it, I'm just happy that I don't have Tesla exposure and just leave it. A bad financial decision. I would have made so much money on that, but that's kind of how I look at it. But I generally think, like, the moment Trump stops, even Tesla, right? The moment Trump stops, Tesla is gonna bounce a bunch too, and then maybe the world goes back to where the American stock market dominates. But right now, as long as Trump is kind of going down this route, I think you're gonna see a lot of other countries' stock market outperform the American one, which is crazy. We've not had that in a long time.
I honestly imagine it'll be temporary.
I mean, yeah, I don't think Trump is gonna keep pushing this. It's deeply unpopular, right? Like, people, even with people on Twitter that kind of call me like a shit lib, like whatever, Euro poor, all of that. When I actually start discussing with them, like, what they think about all of this, they actually all, like, dislike the tariffs as well. I think that's very, very, like, across the spectrum, people are not a big fan of it. And it makes sense, right? Because Republicans, like, they're supposed to be conservative, and there's nothing conservative about all of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, the crypto-facing side tends to be pretty libertarian as well, more so than conservative. And, like, protectionism is much more a specific type of conservatism than it is libertarianism, because, like, depending on who you read for libertarianism, you could make a blanket argument. I mean, the overwhelming majority will support free trade, This goes back to Bastiat and all these other economists from ages ago who make up their foundational texts. It's like, yeah, tariffs bad, free trade good. And so I'm sure there's some natural tension there, but we're going to save this for our political economy philosophy podcast.
I mean,
right?
we're currently in the process of morphing it. Have you not noticed?
That's so true. There was a surprising amount of TA in our defense,
It started off with it too, which is better, right? So people can listen and then they're like, fuck this shit at the end. It's much better than the other way around.
The German with Trump derangement syndrome is going to tell me about my president. Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say, like, you can make that argument and I'm down with it. Like, when people say, like, hey, you have Trump deranged syndrome. But I would argue a lot of the people in my comments have it too, just the other way around. Like, you cannot just blanket say everything he says is good without actually thinking about it for 1 second and then argue someone else has Trump derangement syndrome. Because you are on the front lines with this, my friend. Like, it just makes no sense. Like, just look at the things that are happening at face value without anyone telling you like, what to think. It's a little bit frustrating when I hear the same argument 5 times and then I see a clip from Fox News and people are, like, just rehashing what they saw on TV, and I'm like, and then people tell me that I'm, like, polarized and programmed by German media, which I don't watch. Like, 90% of, or like at least 70% of the media I watch is, like, Fox News, just because it's all over Twitter, it's all over wherever the fuck.
Yeah.
So if anything, I get both sides. But yeah.
Classic
enough
both
of that.
Sidesism. I think that's all, honestly.
Yeah.
I guess thematically is high time frame TA breakdown. The spillover isn't being helped by the S&P being a bit of a shit show. If that reverses and we get a bit of a break on the equities side, I imagine we will for crypto as well. There are enough excuses for it once the headwinds go away. 30% from top to bottom, 80K round number, second stab failed, close enough to value. There's a lot of, like, nice reasons to make up once the
regulatory
headwinds are gone.
landscape change.
Regulatory landscape, yeah, all of that type of stuff is available. Just got to get the big block out of the way. Absent that, if you're in a TA vacuum, your deep value discount, whatever shit on BTC is a bit lower, and your reclaim levels are a bit higher. And so unless you're short-term trading, news, headlines, whatever, in which case you're taking stab around 80k. If you're not that guy, then your levels are 90 and 70, I think. And you can always extrapolate that to ETH as well, and any altcoins where you have good high time frame levels. I think it makes more sense to wait for like BTC strength or BTC support to line up. If you're not going to do that and you want to buy the levels outright, I think at the very least it's worth giving yourself some room in terms of wicks or like market impact if BTC pushes another time into support, so you don't get liquidated on a wick through support or something of that nature. Yeah. Anything else to add?
No, I think that's it.
It's the best we can do in these conditions. Hopefully I have some more optimistic summaries soon. I think like the last one was the market's just like a piece of shit after this big liquidation move, and the V reversal doesn't look super likely type of thing. And then we had the strategic reserve Trump back and forth candle, and we kind of bled down from that point. And we're more or less in the same place, funnily enough. So
pretty much exactly the same, yeah.
Time is a flat circle on Casual Friday, but that's all we have time for this week. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you to Boo for supporting the show as always. Their links are available in the description below, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.